Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This episode, we're going to start digging into the engines that I'm working on. Again, I've got two different motors. One is a factory 351 Windsor that currently has a 2-barrel carburetor on it. And as stated before, it's got all the emissions and everything for the era that this one was built for. This particular motor is still a 351 Windsor. It is bored out 60 over. So every engine designation has the bore, which is the size hole that's in the cylinder, and the stroke, which is how much that cylinder is going to move up and down. Between those two numbers, you get your size of your engine. So for instance, a 305 Chevy versus a 350 Chevy from the outside looks very similar. That's going to be the internal that's different. Same thing with Ford, a 289 versus a 302. Ford had quite a few different engine options in their run in the last 100 years. Most commonly be the old school flathead. They had a Y block like I have in my 255 projects at the moment. These ones are going to be a little bit newer, so they're going to have the Windsor based engine, which is based out of the Windsor, Windsor, Ontario assembly plant. You've got a Cleveland, 351 Cleveland, which is based out of Cleveland, Ohio. You've got a 351 400 modified. You have your FE motors, which gave you the 360, the 390, the 427, 428, I believe is in that family as well. Ford had the 385 series, which is your 429, 460. They didn't use the traditional term like big block, small block, like Chevy and Chrysler did. Although currently the 289, the 302, the 351 are considered small block. The 429, 460 is considered the big block, otherwise known as the 385 series and the FE. There is quite a following of the Y blocks. The flatheads, of course, are instrumental in some of the early hot rod and racing days. But again, some of those have kind of gone by the wayside as either new technology is advanced or parts are becoming a little more rare. So this one here would be the performance engine. This one does have 351 in the galley. I don't think they all did that, but that does help acknowledge what the base engine is. Finding the right piston here. This one has a .060 overbore, which means they've actually made the bore larger. As you have that, there's a common hot rod credo saying there's no replacement for displacement. So there's a lot of different things you can do with aftermarket injection, power adders. You've got nitrous, you got turbocharging, you got supercharging. But dollar for dollar, there's really not a better performance option than just having a physically larger motor. So this one here is factory. Essentially, they are going to be exactly the same underneath everything. So what I'm going to do, because of time for my project and kind of scarcity of parts right now, this one, it does roll free. If I put a wrench on it, it will spin over. The gentleman I bought it from swore to me it came out of a running vehicle, so I'm going to take him at his word, which is generally not something that you ever want to do, but sometimes that's what you're left to work with. So my goal for this episode is to get this base engine cleaned up as much as I can. Always starting with a clean base is going to give you better results. Making sure you're not going to get any crud inside the motor when you get it pulled apart. We're going to go through some part designations and what the changes I'm making are actually going to do. Some of them will just be cosmetic differences. Some of them are going to be performance differences. And some of them are going to be tuning and reliability differences. Again, as I stated in an earlier video, the biggest thing you want to do is try and stay true to your project. But sometimes things do happen. The original plan was to build this one up for the wagon for Power Tour. But again, with the scarcity of parts right now due to supply issues from COVID and a multitude of other reasons, this is getting a little bit hard, and I can't guarantee I'm going to have all the parts I need in enough time to build it to be efficient for my road trip. So that is why we are shifting gears. So I am doing a different intake. Again, this is a Wien Stealth intake. It's a low rise. This one is also dual plenum intake manifold, which does change the runners a little bit. I will be putting a 4-bell carburetor on it. I will be putting an aftermarket camshaft in it. I will be doing a little bit of a spacer I've had pretty decent luck with, and I'm going to do with an aftermarket ignition. It's going to be an MSD unit. It will eliminate the factory ignition since I've got a few parts I'm going to be changing to make sure I can adapt it for everything I want to do. So in this particular engine, what I'm going to start with again is going to be the cleanup. So you can take a look down in the intake valleys. There is a bunch of garbage from sitting in and just building up crud. Some of this is from before I started my video series. I took off a lot of the emissions restrictions. This one did have an air pump on here for smog control. This one is set up for power steering, which I'm not going to be using at the moment. This one is set up for mechanical fan. I may be switching that to electrical. I have not fully decided on that yet. It is the V-belt setup as opposed to a newer serpentine setup, which I will probably keep for right now, but will most likely upgrade later. Again, it does have a factory type distributor in there with a vacuum advance. That'll be switched out for a better unit. So again, right now, get in here with any kind of brushes. If you need like a flathead screwdriver, I've got my little mini vac there to help get in the crevices. Again, as much of this as we can clean up before we actually open up the engine will definitely help. Once I get everything done and set up the way I want to, then we'll start taking a look and see if I want to paint the engine or not. So as we take a look at the side, there's a lot of grease down here. It's a little bit cold for the pressure washer for right now, so we will see. We'll see how far I can get there. Making sure all the fluids are drained out is going to for sure help, because you don't want to crack something open and have it leak all over your floor like it has already started to. So my next update will be after the cleaning and before the disassembly. All right, so it may not look like it's much different, but I spent a good 20 minutes, half hour scraping, cleaning, getting everything loose off that I can. So at this point, you want to have a plan of attack on how you're going to disassemble. So what I'm going to start with is removing the front dress. So all the accessories, I'm going to remove the thermostat housing, everything off the front of the motor, and then I'm going to work on the top down, get everything cleaned up and ready for the intake swap. Once I have everything opened up, I'm going to check the condition of what I can, just shy of pulling the heads off. Again, making sure everything rotates freely, nothing's stuck, nothing's, real obvious signs of damage, and just kind of see what I uncover as I go. So when you see a toolbox of somebody who's been working on vehicles for a while, and if you're kind of new to it, there's a lot of questions about why somebody needs so many tools. And really it comes down to the project that you're working on. In this particular case, I don't want to use power tools because you never know what's going to break. And I'd rather take a little more effort and keep as much as possible, keep them from something breaking inside the head that's going to take a lot longer to fix. So I like to do things by hand in this scenario. Newer things or things that you've had apart, you can use power tools on, not a big deal. But on this one, to like say on the alternator, to do the adjuster bolt that's backed in there pretty tight, you get a longer ratchet, maybe with a flex head, get in there a little bit easier, be able to use a little more torque on it without hurting, snapping loose, busting your knuckles. Sometimes it's a matter of having a ratcheting head on a wrench, again for tight situations. I do have a set of super thin wrenches. So when you need them, they come in super handy. You don't need them a whole lot. But again, you'll have some old-time mechanics that I have a drawer full of tools that they modified just for one-time use, but it makes the job so much easier. So one thing you're paying attention to while you're working on whatever project, in this case working on an engine, you may have to get a couple of extra tools that will really help you out. It's not just a matter of spending money to spend money. There's generally a reason why the different types of tools exist. Yeah, so making sure all your fluids are drained. Oops, missed one. That's not a bad mess, but unexpected. So another really important tip as you're tearing down your project, as I'm getting the front closer and closer to being done, make sure you bag and tag your parts, your hardware, making sure you know what goes with what and how it goes. Take lots of pictures, take videos, whatever you need to do, because all it takes is one back-ordered part to completely forget where you're at, how everything goes. There's usually plenty of reference manuals and stuff online as well, but if you can keep yourself from having to rely on that information, all the better. With the Ford water pumps especially, they've got different size bolts, they got different size holes. I generally try and leave the bolt in the hole so I know exactly which one goes where, because you either will bottom out into the water jacket, or you will damage something, or it just won't seal properly. You get your motor back in your car and you got to rip everything back apart again. So definitely paying attention and being aware of what you're working on. Like me, I've got so many different projects, with many of them being real similar. It'd be really easy to forget, okay, which car did this go to, what project, what motor am I working on? So just make sure you take really good notes. It seems very tedious, and it's one of my biggest failures when I'm on projects, because I have to go back and forth, again, with bolt locations and what am I missing. But it really is super important, and it does make your project reassembly a whole lot easier when you know right where everything goes. But I've just about got my front dress tore down, and then I will start working up top. So when you're going through your project, your level of teardown is going to be directly related to what you're actually doing. So in my case, I originally wasn't going to pull the crank pulleys off. There's just one more step that I was really hoping not have to do. But I'm going to be switching a few things over. I'm going to be changing the oil pan. I'm going to pull off the timing cover. I might do a different one that's a little more suited to the project that I'm doing. So I am going to end up having to yank that off. Unless I have reason to, I'm not going to pull the heads, but I will be changing the valve covers. Because I am changing the entire intake, I don't need to remove the carburetor independently. I do not need to remove the water outlet independently, but I will have to take out the distributor, which is not a big deal because I plan on changing that anyway. So I've got the distributor unbolted. Go ahead and crank that guy out. Oh, that's the peanut. And let's see if I can crack this intake loose one-handed. Let's see. Nope, we'll have to take a different cut on it. Just a moment. So after a little bit of movie magic, I did have to take the valve covers loose. A couple whacks with the rubber mallet to break the seal. So taking a peek, it actually looks pretty decent inside here. Not a lot of gunk or solid stuff caked up. Everything appears good shape. No excess play in the rockers, at least on that side. Again, what we're looking at, there's no debris down the lower ends. We do have regular oil in there. Shaking every rocker, no excessive play, so those are all in decent shape. So, and again, on the back side, couple of whacks with a rubber mallet, and she should come loose. Maybe not. All the bolts are loose. And my lovely assistant hold my camera for me. So depending on what the previous builder used to seal up the surfaces, sometimes they can bind up just a little bit. There we go. Could have done better in my cleaning, looks like. And we are free. So again, as we look down in the valley pan, we do have the 351. Get a better view. We do have the 351 in there, so we are confirming that this is a 351 block. The other way to verify that is going to be the deck height of the block here. It's taller on a 351 versus a 302. Taking a look on the inside, being the fact that we are unsure of the miles on the motor, everything actually looks really clean. A little bit of buildup here and there, but nothing that really jumps out as being bad. Got a little port there to open up just a touch. But this should be a good candidate for a rebuild. So I feel comfortable continuing from here. Now at this point, I've done a few different rounds of, the degreaser and rinsing it off, degreaser, rinsing it off. When you're done, anything water-based on something like this to keep from rust from coming, you want to get in here with like a spray gun, air gun, clean out all your ports, all your passages. I don't have the heads off, so I did squirt just a little bit of WD-40 into the cylinder, cranked it over by hand, make sure to negate any damage the water may do. For a long-term project or for like a show car type thing, you disassemble it, you'd get it out, get it hot tank, get all the other stuff off. Again, that's not really the build I'm doing with this one, and I'm okay just doing a quick cleanup and a once-over. So once you get everything clean, everything dry, I am going to paint this one. Now with paint, the paint is the easy part. It's the preparation beforehand. So the better prep you do, the better results you're going to have. So take your time. A couple different things you can do. You can tape off everything that you don't want to use. I myself am going to loose place the intake and the valve covers back on. I'm leaving the oil pan on, and that really limits what I have to tape to get a pretty decent job out of it. Again, I'm not going for show car, but I do want to have it look semi-good when I pop the hood. So again, I did loose place the intake and the valve covers on, so that's really gonna eliminate the taping that I have to do. There may be a little cleanup afterwards. I will be replacing the timing cover gaskets. I will be replacing the oil pan with a front sump style. So all that will come off. I'm not really concerned how that looks. But as far as the base block goes, that should save all my taping on it. You can do a pretty decent tape job and eliminate some of the other stuff you'll have to deal with. But this will be acceptable for me for what I'm doing. Now when it comes time to actually paint, you're not trying to lay down everything all at once. You want to do a couple of fogging coats, read the directions. Usually they say about 10 to 15 minutes is flash time in between them. You want to make sure that you have your can, if you're doing rattle can like I am, well shaken. We'll make sure everything's mixed up. Usually leave them sit out. This is the color I'm going to do. Leave them sit out in the sun a little bit. Maybe soak them in some warm water just to make sure everything is kind of a common consistency. These are going to be those little things that you can do that really have the potential of having a big impact when you're done. And again, I generally start top to bottom, and you just want a little bit of a fog coat. You're not trying to completely paint the full color, in this case the full primer, at one time. Essentially what you're doing with the first one is just laying down a little base color, but as that starts to tack up, you're going to have something for the rest of the paint to adhere to, so you don't get a lot of runs in your paint when you're finished. Again, it's just an engine, and a lot of people won't be able to see the fine details, but as a coach of mine in high school once said, practice makes permanence. If this is the way you do it all the time, then that's the way you'll do it when it matters. And then we will let that sit. So it is a little hard to tell in the lighting that I have, but this is after 3 coats, and I got a pretty good base. Now this is just the primer, so you want a nice even color. I'm going to give it another couple minutes to finish tacking up, and then I will start in on the color. But no runs, no sags. Again, the intake I don't care about. That's just for taping purposes. Now when I am done, there's a couple surfaces here, like up on the exhaust outlet, that I will get a rag with some denatured alcohol or some mineral spirits, and I will clean off those flanges. I'm not going to leave them that way. So there are going to be a couple spots that I will touch up when I'm done. Again, right way, wrong way, everybody's got an opinion, but the ones that I have done, it's worked out well for me with no real side effects. So you might get a little bit of interesting smell as it is burning off any paint you may have missed. Same thing around the oil filter. I will clean that up, so there's no chance any of that will come loose and get into my oil. But again, for the build that I'm doing, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. Now this is where we start to get serious. Yeah, and this is going to be the paint that I'm using, just a classic Ford blue. Because this is going to be the color and we're a little more concerned about this part, I'm going to do a couple of test patterns. Make sure you don't get any weird splotches when you first start. And like almost everything else I do, start top to bottom. And again, you're just going to do those little light fog, just get a hint of color. You are not trying to set the final tint on your first spray. Everybody's going to have their own pattern, their own rhythm. Most directions do suggest 8 to 10 inches. We do have a couple of weird angles and weird corners, so it's really hard to get the long spray. But when you do have your long flat surfaces, it is recommended. Like here, try and go all the way across, nice and uniform. Now I do like this particular paint. It does cover really well and cover pretty smooth. I've used it before. Pretty common at most of your parts houses. If any of you watched my introductory video, you know which one I'm going to recommend. And that's about it. Again, just enough to give a hint of color. You are not trying to set the tone here. The color and the primer will be the same. Give it about a 15-minute flash time, and then we'll hit it again. I'll probably do another 2 full solid coats, what they call your wet coat. We'll get into more of that later when we're doing real paint and body on the Fairlane. But this is the next step, starting to take shape. And here we are with all 3 coats of color that I'm going to put on. Again, if it were going to be a show car, I would have done a little bit different. Where some of the rough casting marks, I would have sanded them smooth, cleaned it up a little bit, something more presentation. As I said before, I build mostly drivers, so I don't really care about that part of it. But we got nice, good, even color right where I need it. I will have a little bit of cleanup around. And that is the first step towards the next level engine. And I want to show you a comparison. So it doesn't take a whole lot to go from a pretty stock looking motor to pretty decent looking as well. Again, this isn't just cosmetic. The 4-barrel carburetor does give you ability to run more fuel with an aftermarket intake. You can plan your runner length to your power output. I haven't decided if I'm going to try and put the cam in right away to give me a little more punch there. But all in all, this is going to be a pretty decent little motor to go into that wagon. This is going to be the end of this particular episode. The next one, I'm going to finish doing my teardown, get the oil pan off. Again, I'm going to have to switch that to what they call a front sump. We'll get into that when I finish my teardown. Get everything else cleaned up. We'll do a compression check, which I probably should have done prior, just to make sure everything's in good shape. So that'll be my next series of videos on the engine. As far as my next presentation, I do plan on getting into the wagon and start doing the engine and transmission removal here to prep it for the install of the one I'm building now. So I do appreciate anybody and everybody that watches. I know I'm not as refined as some of the other shows, but I do appreciate your time spending with me. As always, if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to leave them. If I see them, I will answer what I can. Thanks again.